Be me Feminine. Always thought guys are weak when they cry about relationships. Have a brother, Corvin. Kinda soft, but nice guy. He's living with his girlfriend, Morel. Just had a cute baby. I think it's cringe, but whatever. His choice. Honestly, never understood why men make such a big deal out of everything. Like when my friend's ex complained about paying alimony for 3 months straight. Meanwhile, women deal with actual problems and just get on with it. But Corvin was different somehow. Never really complained about anything. Just went along with whatever Morel wanted. Remember when they first got together, maybe 2 years ago? She was this bubbly girl from his work cafeteria or something. Always giggling at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. Thought she was putting on an act, but Corvin ate it up. Within 6 months, she moved into his apartment. The pregnancy announcement came somewhere around last spring, I think. They were both glowing and excited about becoming parents. Corvin immediately started buying baby books and planning nurseries. Spent weekends assembling cribs and painting walls light yellow. Said they wanted to be surprised about the gender. Meanwhile, I was finishing my degree and watching this whole domestic scene unfold. My friend Alara from law school kept making jokes about how quickly they were moving. Said something about how smart women wait to see if a guy is actually commitment material. But honestly, I just thought Morel got lucky finding someone so willing to provide. The baby arrived sometime in late summer. Cute little thing with dark hair. Corvin was completely smitten, took paternity leave and everything. Would send me photos constantly of the kids sleeping or making faces. Started talking about marriage and buying a house in the suburbs. Typical guy getting all emotional about fatherhood. Around this time, my mom started making comments about when I would settle down. Said Corvin was setting a good example by taking responsibility. Kept hinting that I should find someone reliable like him. Honestly, made me want to avoid family dinners for a while. Then, somewhere in early fall, Corvin mentioned doing one of those DNA ancestry tests. Said he wanted to know more about our family background for the baby. Morel thought it was a cute idea, said she might do one too. Just seemed like another one of those trendy things people were doing. Like when everyone was doing those personality tests online. Didn't think much of it when he ordered the kit. Just another thing to waste money on, in my opinion. But Corvin was always interested in that genealogy stuff. Used to spend hours on those family tree websites when we were younger. So it made sense he would want to do this. The kit arrived maybe a week later in a plain white box. Corvin was excited like a kid on Christmas morning. Read all the instructions twice before doing the sample. Said he wanted to make sure he did it right so the results would be accurate. Morel joked that he was being obsessive about a simple spit test. Few weeks passed, and honestly forgot about the whole thing. Was dealing with my own stuff, final semester projects and applications. Corvin seemed normal during this time, still playing happy dad. Would babysit sometimes when Morel needed to run errands. Everything looked perfectly domestic and boring. Then the email notification came on a Tuesday, I think. Corvin called me around lunchtime, sounding weird. Said his results were ready, but he hadn't looked yet. Wanted me to come over that evening to check them together. Thought it was strange, but figured he was just being dramatic. Showed up at his apartment around 7. Morel was feeding the baby in the kitchen. Corvin had his laptop open on the coffee table, but the screen was black. Said he had been staring at the login page for 20 minutes, couldn't bring himself to actually sign in. Told him to stop being ridiculous and just click the button. These tests are supposed to be fun, not stressful. He finally entered his password and waited for the page to load. Started scrolling through the ethnicity breakdown first. Mostly what we expected based on what Mom had told us growing up. Then he clicked on the DNA relatives section. Page took forever to load because their internet was slow. But when it finally came up, something was immediately wrong. The paternity section showed 0% match with the baby. Corvin just stared at the screen without saying anything. Morel came over to see what we were looking at. When she saw the results, she started crying immediately. Said the test had to be wrong because those things aren't always accurate. Corvin still hadn't said a word, just kept refreshing the page, like he thought the numbers might change if he tried enough times. Honestly, my first thought was that Morel had screwed up the baby sample, maybe mixed up the swabs or contaminated something. Seemed more likely than the obvious explanation. But Corvin was starting to look sick, face all pale and sweaty. Finally closed the laptop and said he needed some air. Spent the next hour trying to convince him it was probably a mistake. These home tests aren't as reliable as medical-grade ones. Could be a lab error or database glitch or something. Morel kept nodding and saying exactly what I was thinking, but deep down we all knew what this probably meant. Corvin barely slept that night, according to what he told me later. Kept staring at the baby and trying to see family resemblances. Said he realized he had been assuming the kid looked like him, but now couldn't tell if that was real or just wishful thinking. Morel cried herself to sleep on the couch. Next morning, he called in sick to work. Spent the day researching DNA testing accuracy rates. Found out that paternity results are actually pretty reliable. False negatives are extremely rare with these companies, but still wasn't ready to accept what this meant. Meanwhile, I was trying to process this information myself. Always assumed Morel was straightforward and honest. Never occurred to me that she might have been with someone else. Started remembering little things that seemed suspicious now, like how she avoided talking about her past relationships. Corvin decided to get a clinical paternity test done through a medical lab. Said he needed to be absolutely certain before making any decisions. Made an appointment for that Thursday at a place downtown. Asked me to drive him because he didn't trust himself behind the wheel. Morel stayed home with the baby. Said she was too embarrassed to go. The clinic was one of those sterile medical buildings. Filled out paperwork while Corvin sat there looking miserable. Technician was professional, but you could tell she had seen this before. Took samples from both Corvin and the baby. Said results would be ready in 3 business days. Those 3 days were probably the worst of Corvin's life. Called me every few hours, asking what I thought would happen. Couldn't concentrate at work, so basically stopped going. His manager started leaving voicemails asking if he was okay. Morel was walking around like a ghost, barely talking to anyone. Meanwhile, my friend Alara was asking why I seemed so distracted. Couldn't really explain the situation without betraying Corvin's privacy. But she could tell something serious was happening with my family. Kept offering to help if there was anything she could do legally. Didn't realize how relevant that offer would become. Friday afternoon, the clinic called with results. Corvin was at my apartment when his phone rang. Put it on speaker so I could hear too. Technician confirmed what we already suspected. 0 probability of paternity. Results were definitive. Corvin just hung up and sat there for maybe 10 minutes. Didn't cry or yell or punch anything like guys do in movies. Just looked completely empty, like someone had unplugged him. Finally said he needed to go home and figure out what to do next. Asked if I would come with him to talk to Morel. The conversation was exactly as awkward as you would expect. Morel started crying before Corvin even showed her the official results. Said she had made a mistake, but it didn't mean anything. Claimed it was just one night and she wasn't even sure who the father was. Corvin listened to all of this without interrupting. When she finished explaining, he asked very quietly who else it could be. Morel mentioned a few names, guys from work or friends of friends. Said she had been drinking and wasn't thinking clearly. Kept apologizing and saying she never meant for this to happen. But Corvin was already mentally checking out of the conversation. Spent the next week in this weird limbo state. Corvin was still living in the apartment, but sleeping on the couch. Morel kept trying to act like everything was normal. Would ask him to help with feeding or changing diapers. He would do it, but you could see it was killing him inside. His friend Arden started coming around more often during this time. Could tell something was wrong, but didn't know the details. Kept suggesting they go out for drinks or catch a game somewhere. Corvin would always decline, said he had too much to think about. Arden eventually cornered me and asked what was going on. Decided Corvin needed someone to talk to besides me. Told Arden about the paternity test results. He was shocked, but immediately understood why Corvin was falling apart. Said he would try to get him out of the apartment more. Maybe help him clear his head and figure out next steps. Around this same time, my mom started asking questions. Noticed that Corvin wasn't posting baby photos anymore. Said he seemed distant during their phone calls. Wanted to know if there were problems between him and Morel. Didn't know how to explain without making everything worse. Alara was also picking up on my stress during this period. Finally told her what was happening with the paternity situation. She immediately went into lawyer mode and started asking practical questions, like whether Corvin's name was on the birth certificate, and what his legal obligations might be going forward. Turns out the law is pretty complicated in these situations. If you're not married, the biological father has limited automatic rights. But if someone else is acting as father, they can become legally responsible, especially if they're providing financial support for extended periods. Corvin had been paying for everything since the baby was born. Alara said he should probably consult with a family law attorney, get advice about how to protect himself financially, and understand what his options were for backing out. Never really thought about men needing legal protection in these situations, but apparently it happens more often than people realize. Meanwhile, Corvin was getting more withdrawn every day. Stopped answering texts from coworkers who were asking about his absence. His manager finally called me directly asking if there was a family emergency. Had to make up some vague story about personal issues. Didn't want to get him fired on top of everything else. Morel was also starting to panic about their living situation. Realized that Corvin might actually leave and she couldn't afford rent alone. Started being extra nice and cooking his favorite meals. Talking about couples counseling and working through their problems. But you could see in Corvin's eyes that he was already gone. The breaking point came maybe 3 weeks after the test results. Was having dinner at Mom's house. First time we had all been together. Mom was asking why Corvin looked so tired and thin. Morel started crying and said they were having relationship difficulties, but didn't mention anything about the real reason. Corvin sat through this whole performance without saying anything. Mom started giving advice about communication and compromise. Said all couples go through rough patches after having a baby. Kept talking about how important it was for him to step up as a father. You could see him getting more and more agitated. Finally, he stood up and said he needed to leave. Mom asked what was wrong and why he was being so rude. Morel was still sniffling and playing the victim. That's when I decided I had heard enough of this nonsense. Someone needed to tell the truth about what was actually happening. Looked straight at Mom and said Corvin wasn't the father. Room went completely silent for maybe 30 seconds. Mom's face went through about 5 different expressions. Morel stopped crying and started looking panicked. Corvin just nodded like he was relieved someone finally said it. Mom immediately started asking questions about how we knew for sure. Explained about the DNA tests and medical confirmation. She turned to Morel and asked if this was true. Morel admitted that she had been with someone else, but kept insisting it was a mistake and didn't change how she felt about Corvin. Mom's reaction was not what I expected at all. Thought she might blame Corvin for not being man enough to keep his woman. Instead, she got angry at Morel for deceiving everyone. Said she felt sorry for the baby, but Corvin had no obligation to raise another man's child. Told Morel she should contact the actual father immediately. This was the first time anyone had clearly stated that Corvin could walk away. Up until then, everyone was tiptoeing around the situation, acting like he was stuck because the baby was innocent. Mom's bluntness seemed to give him permission to consider his own needs. You could see something shift in his posture. Drove Corvin home that night in complete silence. When we got to his building, he asked if I thought he was being selfish. Told him honestly that he had every right to start over. No one should have to build their life around someone else's lie. He nodded and said he had already been thinking the same thing. Next morning, he called Arden and asked for help finding a new place. Said he wanted to move out as soon as possible. Arden didn't ask any questions, just started looking at apartment listings. Found a decent one-bedroom across town that was available immediately. Corvin put down a deposit that afternoon. Meanwhile, Morel was desperately trying to change his mind. Said she would do anything to make this work. Promised to cut contact with everyone from her past. Kept talking about how good they were together before all this happened. But Corvin had already emotionally moved on. Packing took most of a weekend with help from me and Arden. Weird seeing Corvin's stuff separated from all the baby things. Realized how much of his identity had become tied up in being a father. Now he was back to just being himself again, which was probably healthier in the long run. Morel tried to guilt trip him right until the end. Said the baby would grow up without a father figure. Claimed she couldn't afford to raise a child alone. Kept asking what she was supposed to tell people about why he left. Corvin finally told her that wasn't his problem to solve. Ilara came by during the move and casually mentioned some legal advice. Said Corvin should document everything about the paternity test results. Keep records showing he had stopped financial support immediately after finding out. Would help protect him if anyone tried to claim he was legally responsible later. Handed him a business card for a family law attorney she knew. Mom showed up on the last day to help clean the apartment. Didn't say much, but you could tell she was proud of Corvin for leaving. Kept making comments about how he deserved better than this situation. Said she hoped he would find someone honest next time. Seemed relieved that he wasn't going to waste his life on a lie. The actual moving day was strange and anticlimactic. Corvin loaded his last box into Arden's truck around noon. Morel was holding the baby and crying on the front steps. He looked at them for a few seconds, but didn't say goodbye. Just got in the passenger seat and told Arden to drive. His new apartment was small but clean and completely his own. Spent that first evening sitting on boxes, eating takeout. Said it felt weird to be alone, but also peaceful. No more walking on eggshells or pretending everything was fine. Could finally start thinking about what he actually wanted from life. Took him another week to go back to work. Told his manager he had been dealing with a family crisis, but it was resolved now. Coworkers who asked about the baby got vague answers about relationship changes. Slowly started acting more like his old self again. Even made plans to grab drinks with some guys from the office. Arden was instrumental in getting him back to normal social activities. Dragged him out to sports bars and introduced him to new people. Said Corvin needed to remember what it was like to have fun, without constantly worrying about someone else's needs. Took a while, but gradually he started smiling again. Ilara's lawyer friend turned out to be really helpful. Explained that since Corvin wasn't married and had stopped support immediately, his legal exposure was minimal as long as he stayed away. Advised him to avoid any contact with Morel or the baby going forward. Said clean breaks were usually better for everyone involved. Few months later, heard through mutual friends that Morel had figured out who the real father was. Apparently, he wasn't interested in being involved. She ended up moving back in with her parents for help with childcare. Felt a little bad for the baby, but not really for her. Actions have consequences, and she made her choices. Corvin started dating again sometime around the new year. Nothing serious, but seemed to be enjoying meeting new people. Said he was being more careful about red flags this time. Wanted to really know someone before getting emotionally invested, which seemed like a healthy approach after everything that happened. Looking back on this whole situation changed my perspective on some things. Used to think men were just being dramatic about relationship problems. But watching Corvin go through this was genuinely heartbreaking. He had planned his whole future around something that wasn't real. Took real strength to walk away and start over. Also made me appreciate having friends like Alara who know about legal stuff. Never realized how complicated these situations could get, or how important it is to understand your rights and options. Probably saved Corvin from years of financial obligation he didn't actually have. Knowledge is power when your life is falling apart. Mom's reaction also surprised me in a good way. Expected her to pressure Corvin into staying for traditional family values reasons. Instead, she supported his decision to prioritize his own well-being. Said life is too short to waste on people who lie to you. Was proud of her for seeing the situation clearly. These days, Corvin seems much happier and more confident. Has his own place, stable job, and active social life. Talks about maybe wanting kids someday, but with the right person. Said this experience taught him to trust his instincts more and not ignore warning signs just because he wants something to work out. Arden remains his best friend and biggest supporter through all of this. Proved that good friends will help you move on from bad situations without judging your choices or trying to fix everything. Just showed up when needed and provided practical assistance. That kind of loyalty is rare and valuable. Alara's legal connections turned out to be more useful than expected. Having someone who understands family law made a huge difference in helping Corvin protect himself and make informed decisions. Reminded me why it's important to have friends with different professional expertise. You never know when you might need specialized knowledge. Even learned something about my own assumptions and biases. Used to dismiss men's relationship problems as weakness or drama. But betrayal hurts everyone, regardless of gender. Corvin's pain was real and justified given what he had been put through. Made me more empathetic to people dealing with similar situations. The whole experience also highlighted how quickly life can change. One day, Corvin thought he was building a family. Next day, he discovered his entire reality was based on deception. But he adapted and rebuilt rather than staying stuck in a bad situation, which takes courage most people don't realize they have. Morel occasionally tries to contact him through social media or mutual friends, usually around holidays or the baby's birthday. Sends photos and updates like they're still connected somehow. Corvin blocks these attempts and maintains strict no contact, which seems healthier than getting drawn back into drama. Sometimes wonder what would have happened if he had never done that DNA test. Might have spent years raising another man's child without knowing. Probably would have married Morel and bought that suburban house. Built his whole identity around a foundation of lies. Ignorance might have felt better in the short term, but truth was better long term. His co-workers still don't know the full story about what happened. Just think he went through a bad breakup and moved on. Corvin prefers keeping his personal life private at work. Says it's nobody's business, and he doesn't want sympathy or gossip, which is probably the mature way to handle it. My relationship with Corvin got stronger through this whole ordeal. He appreciated having family support when his world was falling apart. Said it meant everything to have someone who believed him and backed his decisions. Made me realize how important sibling relationships can be during crisis. We talk more now and are closer than we were before. Also changed how I think about marriage and commitment in general. Used to assume people were basically honest about important things. Now realize how easy it is for someone to maintain elaborate deceptions. Makes me want to be more careful about who I trust with my future, and more understanding when relationships don't work out as planned. The baby is probably around 2 years old now, based on my calculations. Hope Morel eventually finds stable support system for raising her child, but glad Corvin didn't sacrifice his life for someone else's mistake. Everyone deserves a chance to build happiness on honest foundations. Lies always come out eventually and cause more damage the longer they persist. These days, when friends complain about relationship drama, I listen differently. Try to understand their perspective instead of immediately judging. Recognize that people can genuinely be blindsided by betrayal, and that walking away is sometimes the strongest choice you can make. Not every situation can or should be fixed through compromise. Corvin finally moves out, leaves Morel behind. Arden helps him carry boxes. Alara throws some legal advice like it's nothing. Mom doesn't say shit, just sits there. I watch my brother start over with literally nothing, all because of a piece of paper that said, "Not the father."